Most people believe change begins with a single powerful decision, a breakthrough moment, a sudden realization that alters everything at once. But life rarely changes that way. More often, it changes quietly, through repetition, through thoughts returned to again and again, through ideas that feel small in the moment, yet shape the mind over time. James Allen understood this deeply. He wrote that the mind is not transformed by intensity, but by habit. Not by what we think once, but by what we allow ourselves to think repeatedly. Every thought you entertain leaves a subtle impression. One thought may seem harmless. One return to the same idea may feel insignificant. But repetition gives thoughts weight. A thought revisited becomes familiar. A familiar thought becomes comfortable. And a comfortable thought becomes automatic. This is how habits of mind are formed. Most people assume habits are physical. Actions repeated until they become routine. But habits begin long before action. They begin in the unseen realm of thought. What you dwell on becomes what you expect. What you expect becomes what you accept. And what you accept quietly becomes the standard by which you live. This is why two people can face the same circumstances and experience entirely different lives. Their outer conditions may appear similar, but their inner habits of thought are not. One person repeats thoughts of limitation. Another repeats thoughts of possibility. One rehearses fear. Another rehearses steadiness. Neither may be aware they are doing this. And that is the most important point. The most powerful habits are not formed through conscious effort, but through unconscious repetition. James Allen warned that we are always shaping our character, whether we intend to or not. The mind never stands still. It is always being trained, either deliberately or by default. If left unattended, the mind adopts the patterns it encounters most often. Old beliefs, inherited fears, unexamined assumptions, emotional reactions replayed so many times they feel like truth. Over time, these repeated thoughts become the lens through which life is interpreted, not because they are accurate, but because they are familiar. This is why change feels difficult. It is not that new ways of thinking are impossible. It is that old patterns have been rehearsed for so long they feel natural. James Allen did not teach force. He taught alignment. He understood that lasting change does not come from fighting the mind, but from gently redirecting it, again and again. The power of repetition works in both directions. The same mechanism that forms limitation also forms clarity. The same process that creates fear can cultivate calm, but only if it is used consciously. The first step is not control. It is awareness. Noticing what thoughts you return to most often. Noticing which inner conversations repeat themselves without invitation. Noticing what you rehearse when nothing demands your attention. This awareness is not meant to judge. It is meant to reveal. Because once a pattern is seen, it is no longer unconscious. And once it is no longer unconscious, it can be gently reshaped. James Allen believed that destiny is not imposed upon us. It is built, thought by thought, habit by habit. And every lasting transformation begins here, with the quiet power of repetition. Most people believe change begins with a single powerful decision. James Allen understood something quieter and far more enduring. He believed that character is not shaped by moments, but by repetition. Every thought you allow to remain, every idea you return to again and again, slowly takes form as habit. And habit, whether noble or destructive, becomes the architect of character. This process is invisible while it is happening. That is why it feels automatic. That is why it feels as though life is simply happening to us. But Allen argued that nothing happens without a mental cause. Circumstance is not random. It is the outer reflection of inner order. A disciplined mind produces clarity. A neglected mind produces confusion, and neither arrives suddenly. The habits of thought we repeat in silence eventually speak through our actions, our tone, and our decisions. This is why attempts at surface change so often fail. We try to adjust behavior without examining the thought that created it. James Allen warned against this illusion. He wrote that men do not attract what they want, but what they are. Not what they hope for, not what they wish for, but what their habitual thinking has made them. This is not a judgment. It is an invitation. because if character is formed through repetition, then it can be reformed the same way. No dramatic upheaval is required, no force, no punishment, only awareness. When you notice a recurring thought pattern, you weaken its hold. When you question it, you loosen its roots, and when you replace it, you begin building a new inner structure. Allen believed that the mind is a garden, thoughts are seeds, and habits are what grow when the same seeds are planted every day. The gardener who neglects the soil will blame the harvest. The gardener who tends it will quietly shape the outcome long before it appears. This is the quiet work, the work no one applauds, the work that changes everything. And it always begins the same way, with the next thought you choose to repeat. James Allen made a clear distinction that most people overlook. He said that life is not governed by chance, but by law. Not a harsh law, not a moral law, but a natural one. Thought is the cause, life is the effect. What we experience outwardly is shaped by what we continually hold inwardly. This is why the same situations seem to repeat until something changes within. The environment may shift, the people may change, but the pattern remains. Allen observed that when individuals feel trapped by circumstance, it is usually because they are trying to solve an outer problem with an unchanged inner cause. This creates frustration, effort without movement, work without progress. But when the cause is addressed, the effect must follow. Not instantly, not dramatically, but inevitably. A fearful mind produces a cautious life, a resentful mind produces conflict, a disciplined mind produces order, and none of these outcomes arrive overnight. They arrive the same way they were built, through consistency. Allen emphasized that no condition appears without preparation. Every success is preceded by unseen alignment, every failure by unseen neglect. This does not mean blame, it means responsibility. Because responsibility restores power. When you understand that your inner state is shaping your outer reality, you are no longer a victim of circumstance. You become a participant in its creation. James Allen did not suggest controlling every thought. He suggested choosing which thoughts deserve repetition. The mind cannot hold everything at once. What you return to grows stronger. What you abandon weakens. This is why focus matters, not as force, but as direction. A river does not rush, it flows. And yet, over time, it shapes stone. So too does thought shape life, quietly, persistently, without argument. And when this principle is understood, life begins to respond differently, not because the world has changed, but because the cause has. James Allen believed that true power is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It reveals itself through consistency. He called this power self-mastery, not the domination of others, but the regulation of oneself. Most people attempt to control outcomes before they have learned to control reactions. They seek peace while allowing inner disorder. They desire clarity while feeding confusion. Allen observed that the undisciplined mind is easily ruled by mood, impulse, and circumstance. But the disciplined mind acts instead of reacts. This does not mean suppression. It means direction. Self-mastery begins with awareness, noticing what triggers you, what pulls you off center, what thoughts you return to without choosing. Once awareness is present, choice becomes possible, and choice is where authority is born. A person who governs their inner life is not easily shaken by outer noise. They may feel pressure, but they are not controlled by it. Allen wrote that calmness of mind is one of the most beautiful jewels of wisdom, not because life becomes easier, but because perception becomes clearer. When reactions are softened, understanding increases. When understanding increases, decisions improve. This is how character is built, not through dramatic acts, but through small, repeated inner victories, choosing patience instead of irritation, choosing reflection instead of impulse, choosing principle instead of convenience. Over time, these choices compound. Self-mastery does not eliminate emotion. It refines it. It does not remove difficulty. It prepares you for it. And as inner authority strengthens, outer life begins to reorganize around it. James Allen believed that no one stumbles into mastery. It is earned through attention, maintained through discipline, and expressed through conduct. This is why lasting change always feels quiet at first, because it begins where no one else can see, within. James Allen taught that destiny is not a mystery. It is not chance. It is not luck. It is not imposed from the outside. It is the visible outcome of invisible habits. He wrote that people do not decide their future all at once. They shape it daily, through the thoughts they repeat and the behaviors those thoughts produce. Habit, to Allen, was simply thought made automatic. A single thought, held briefly, has little power. But a thought repeated becomes a tendency repeated becomes a habit, and a habit, over time, becomes character. This is why change feels slow at first. You are not fighting a moment, you are redirecting momentum. Most people try to correct behavior without examining the inner pattern that drives it. They attempt to remove the symptom while preserving the cause. Allen warned that this approach always fails. Lasting change only occurs when the inner pattern is replaced, not resisted. When a higher thought is consistently chosen, the lower one loses strength naturally. This is how discipline becomes effortless, not through force, but through replacement. Character, in Allen's view, is not something you claim. It is something you demonstrate under pressure. What you choose when no one is watching. How you respond when circumstances are unfair. What you allow yourself to dwell on when the day is over. These moments define direction. And direction, maintained long enough, becomes destiny. This does not mean life unfolds without challenge. It means challenges are met with preparation. Allen believed that the person who governs their habits governs their future, because habits quietly determine what you notice, what you tolerate, and what you pursue. Change the habit, and the path shifts. Not immediately, not dramatically, but unmistakably. This is why small inner decisions carry such long-term weight. They are not small, they are foundational. James Allen did not promise instant transformation. He promised something more reliable, that when thought is aligned with principle and habit is aligned with thought, life eventually aligns with both. And this alignment, once established, cannot be taken away. It must be abandoned from within, which means it can also be rebuilt the same way it began, one thought at a time. James Allen often described the mind as an environment, not an empty space, but a living atmosphere. Just as a physical environment determines what can grow, the mental environment determines what can take root within a person's life. Thoughts are the climate. They either nourish what is constructive or sustain what is destructive. Allen believed that people rarely suffer from a lack of ability. They suffer from an unmanaged inner atmosphere. When the mind is crowded with fear, doubt, resentment, or distraction, even good intentions struggle to survive. This is why effort alone is not enough. No seed can thrive in hostile soil. Allen taught that lasting change requires cultivation, not suppression. You do not eliminate negative thoughts by fighting them. You eliminate them by changing the conditions that allow them to exist. A calm mind weakens anxiety. A disciplined mind weakens impulse. A purposeful mind weakens distraction. The inner environment always obeys the dominant influence. Whatever is repeatedly welcomed eventually becomes permanent. This is why Allen placed such emphasis on vigilance. Not vigilance over others, but vigilance over one's own mental dwelling place. What thoughts are allowed to linger? Which ones are fed with attention? Which ones are rehearsed until they feel familiar? Familiarity, he warned, is how limitation disguises itself as identity. People often mistake their inner noise for their true nature. But Allen made a clear distinction. You are not your thoughts. You are the chooser of them. And what you consistently choose becomes the atmosphere you live within. This atmosphere determines what actions feel natural, what decisions feel possible, and what futures seem attainable. A polluted environment produces distorted judgment. A purified one restores clarity. This is why Allen emphasized simplicity. A quieter inner life reveals direction that was always present, but previously drowned out. When mental clutter is reduced, purpose becomes audible, not as a command, but as a steady pull. Allen believed that peace is not the absence of struggle, it is the presence of order. Order within thought creates harmony within action, and harmony, sustained over time, creates stability that external events cannot undo. The inner environment, once consciously shaped, becomes a refuge, a place where decisions are made deliberately, not reactively. And from this place, life begins to move with less resistance and greater alignment. Not because the world has changed, but because the mind that meets it has. James Allen believed that calmness is not weakness, it is power refined. Not the absence of emotion, but the presence of balance. A calm mind does not mean a passive life, it means a mind that is no longer ruled by disturbance. Allen wrote that as a person grows in self-control, they grow in serenity, and as serenity increases, clarity follows. This is why calmness becomes a form of authority. Not authority over others, but authority over oneself. A calm person is not easily provoked, not because they lack feeling, but because they have understanding. They no longer react to every impulse. They no longer chase every thought. They move with intention. This inner stillness creates strength. Decisions are made without haste. Actions are taken without regret. Challenges are faced without inner collapse. Allen believed that this calmness is the final fruit of disciplined thought. It cannot be imitated. It cannot be forced. It emerges naturally when the inner life has been ordered. This is why calm people often appear grounded, why their presence feels steady, why their words carry weight. They are not louder than others, they are clearer. And clarity has influence. Calmness allows a person to see events as they are, not as emotion paints them. From this perspective, life becomes less reactive and more deliberate. James Allen taught that peace is not found by changing the world, but by mastering one's response to it. When the mind is no longer pulled in every direction, energy is conserved, focus is restored, purpose becomes easier to follow. This is the quiet victory, not the elimination of difficulty, but the ability to move through it without losing oneself. And this state, once developed, does not depend on circumstances, it travels with you. This is why Allen considered calmness one of the highest achievements of character. It is proof that thought has been disciplined, habit refined, and inner order established. And from this place, life unfolds with greater ease. Not because effort disappears, but because resistance has. This is the power James Allen spoke of, a power that grows silently, a power that strengthens with time, a power available to anyone willing to govern their inner world. And it begins, as it always has, with the thoughts you choose to keep.